talking about are the different uses inside of our main client interface inside the different grid layouts. And you can find those grid layouts in like the main grid and the uses tab, the where used tab, the history tab, right? All of these various grids have access to some of these functions that we're going to be discussing here. And we'll kind of go through a few of the functions there. So the first set we'll go through is sorting, finding, and grouping. Then we'll go into the various ways we can filter. And then finally creating saved views that will can be reused and changed for your main view in again in follow-on procedures. So going into the grid layouts, we'll talk about the sort, finding, and grouping. So the grid layouts are very much related to how Excel is laid out in terms of being able to sort your data according to the column headers. So by default, your files are going to be sorted automatically by their file name, but clicking on any of the column headers will resort based on that particular column. Find operation will kind of be like a search, except it's going to be using only the file data that's present in the grid. It won't search any of the other properties. And then we'll talk about the group by function, which is kind of like a way to make a virtual folder structure based on the property data. So I'm going to jump over into Vault here. So first of all, here we have you know, a file full of or a folder full of files here, and right now we're currently sorting by the name, but we can also sort by any of the other headers that are present in here. So again, clicking on a header will then alphabetically sort that particular column. Again, it kind of groups everything up to for the like data values. So here we've got our state grouped up in review, obsolete, released, and work in progress. So again, it's just a nice way to kind of associate all of files based on a common property value. And again, the whole point of this is to help find your files faster. So if you know you're looking for something in review or released, it might be easier to group them together and sort them so that you can just kind of scroll through and try to identify what area of the files that you're looking for. So again, you can tell when a column is being sorted because there's a tiny little triangle on the right-hand side that's going to be that visual indicator to help us know, which columns are being sorted right now. And again, you have the triangle direction for sorting. So right now it's sorted ascending, and then you can have it sort descending, so reverse order. And again, any column will be available to sort on. So if you don't already have some columns in here, this is customizable. So if you right-click on a header, you can come in and say customize the view, and then maybe add in some of the properties that you're more interested in, maybe beyond just state and revision. And what we'll do is in here in the fields area, once we click on that, we're going to be shown all of the possible properties that we can show in the vault here over on the left-hand side, and there are quite a few. But what we'll do is kind of scroll around until we will find, maybe I want to find the checked-in date. So we'll go ahead and click the Add button, and it'll populate over here on the right-hand side, and we'll close that. So now we have that column shown over in the right-hand side. So the nice thing about these columns is that they are customizable. You can actually drag and drop, move them around to position them in a better spot. Maybe you didn't like it over on the right. You can click and drag and move it on over. And again, it's now available for sorting. So sorting in descending versus ascending. Right. And then, so that's basic sorting right there. Next, we'll talk about the find operation. So if you, again, right-click on a header, you'll have access to the Show Find panel. So what this is it's basically another search mechanism. However, it's only going to be within the context of this folder, and it's only going to be searching the visible properties. So whatever is being shown in these headers, right? So that's going to be what gets sought in this find operation. Whereas when you're looking in something like this general search box up here, that's going to be searching, for almost all of the property values in Vault, and it'll be searching subfolders as well. So it's a much more broad-based search, whereas Find is very contextualized, compartmentalized. This folder, these properties only. So again, if I come in here and just do a search for dial, it'll go ahead and show me the files that are that meet that criteria. It's going to highlight it in yellow, showing me that these are the search terms that have been found. Maybe if I wanted to find all my B revisions, right? So you can come in and say, type in the values, and then it'll come over here. You can see over here on the so. Again, it's just another mechanism to be able to search for property values. Once you're done with it, you can click on the little red X over here, and that's going to close that. So again, it's right-click on the header, show the Find panel. You can also use the hotkeys. Or no, I'm sorry, you can't use the hotkeys. That's for advanced Find. Anyways. Show Advanced Find panel. You can also, if any of your search terms are in here, so if we do dial, hit enter, so now that's going to be in there as a drop-down so that it kind of remembers the searches that you had done previously. So if I were to look for something else, like, say, fork, right, so now we have another value in here. I'm going to clear that, close it out, and then finally we'll talk about the group by mechanism. So right now, as we look in Vault, it's already what you may or may not know is that we're already grouping our grids based on whether if they are a file or a folder. So if we come up to our toolbar, and right next to the layout button, we got this little gray box here. This is the group by box, and clicking on that will open up the group by, and we've already got this property in here, entity type. So this is how Vault is separating folders from files for us in the main grid, and how it's grouping it, in this blue text here between folders and files. So if I come back to components here, there are no subfolders, so we're not showing any folder. But if we wanted to kind of make that virtual folder structure based on properties, with that component or the group by box open, we can click and drag a header and pull it up there, and the little double arrows kind of show us where it'll land. So now we've again kind of sorted, but it gives us kind of more of a folder look and feel where we can roll up and close different property values. So if I'm only interested in finding the work in progress stuff, I can just kind of close up the other quote unquote folders and get to my work in progress stuff. And you can have as many properties up here as you want. So you could even come in and do things like add in a revision. So you can either put that as a subfolder to state, or you could put it up above state. So if we did that, we would say, okay, here's all the files, here's all the A revisions, and what their corresponding states are. Or we can change that around, where we're going to have what's my files. We have for review, and then we have revision A's. Here in released, we have a Rev B and a Rev C. And again, any properties that are involved can be utilized to help build this virtual structure. One thing to note is that if you close that box, those groups will stay. They're going to stay present, and you're also not going to have those as columns anymore. Anything that you put in the group by box will not be present for columns because we've grouped by those. So if you want to get those back, you'll want to just kind of pull and drag those back into the header section. And then probably want to leave that entity type there if you're used to Vault having the separation of files and folders. And then we'll just go ahead and close that back up. All right. So that was our sort, find, and group section. So the next we'll talk about our filters and the filter editors. So again, this is another way to kind of find information based on our properties. Just yet another mechanism for finding that kind of stuff. So a couple of notes here is that you select your filters again based on what columns are present. You know, so again, if you want to filter or sort or group by any particular properties, you'll have to add them to the grid first if they're not already there. With filters, it's going to be persistent across folders. So if you have an active filter, regardless of where you navigate to in the Vault, it'll be that filter will stay present. So that'll be just a point of note there. You can turn it on and off, as well as being able to see recently saved or recent filters are saved again in that drop-down box. One thing to note there is that your filters are going to, even though they're saved, they're only saved in your current session. So if you were to close Vault and come back and open it again, those filters would not be there. So I'm going to go ahead and come back here, and we'll talk about the sorting, or the filtering. So again, with our headers, doing a mouse over the top of the column header here, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little tiny glyph in there, and that's the filter icon. So again, if you're used to Microsoft Excel and using the filter mechanisms there, very similar here. So if you click on that little icon inside the group header, you'll get a drop-down of what all the unique values are in that column. And then selecting on one of those objects will show you only those items. So right now we've filtered out everything but released. Right? You do that again. Maybe we want to see what's just work in progress. So again, it just filters out everything. So it's a way to kind of clear away all of that other information, and it's only showing me things that I'm interested in. So if you wanted to kind of filter even further, you have the ability to come down and edit that filter. So if you look down here, we've got this little gray bar that shows us what the active filter is, and it's showing us that the state is equal to work in progress. So again, we can turn that on and off by using this little checkbox. And that'll just kind of switch it back and forth between being active and turned on and off. But we can come in and edit this filter. So right now we are filtering for state equals work in progress. If we wanted to add some more criteria to this, like maybe we wanted to look at the file names, up here we've got this AND operator and a little plus button that'll give us another property to search on. So if we click on it, we can change that to like the file name. Let's scroll down here. And then in the green, we have the operator. So what's the comparison? So we have these different operators here. So we can say equals. So you could say dial.apt, hit apply. And I probably did something correct here. Go ahead and close that. And let me back out one moment. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the header here, and you can go back and clear everything. So you can come back in and say, go ahead and show all. And that's just going to remove that filter. Again, you can come in and do a custom one, which brings us to a different interface. Here we're saying state is like, and then you would enter your value, work in progress or released. But I'm going to come over to the name side, do a custom one there. And by having is like as the operator here, we can use wildcards. You've got this little help icon down here that says use the underscore to represent any single character. And more importantly, we have used the % for any series of characters, or you might be used to using an asterisk or the star. So in this interface here, you're going to want to use a %. So here I can say dial %, or maybe we want to find the forks as well. So come down is like fork %. We'll go ahead and hit OK here. So that's going to filter away anything that doesn't start with dial or fork. Again, so what that did is it brought down here the current filter. We can come over to edit filter. So here we have the name is like dial or name is fork. And again, we're utilizing that % to represent the wildcard of star, so that any values after that would be included. I can come back here, we'll close that. You can also, depending on the data type that you're filtering on, you can have different options. So here with the checked in, we get a different filter dialog. So we can choose specific dates based on the calendar. We can also select today or last week. So if we selected today, we can see that these 3 files were checked in today. Or you could click and drag for a range of dates. And again, you can look down here in the gray area to see how is Vault formulating this filter. So if you wanted to utilize it on your own, you can see that this is how it's used. The checked in value, the operators it's using, and the values that it's using. And like we said, this is filtered based on our, regardless of the folder that you're in, as long as it's active, it'll stay on there. So as you kind of navigate around, that filter is going to stay present. So obviously, if nothing is showing here, then none of the files were checked in with that criteria. I'll go ahead and turn that off. So that is the filtering mechanisms. Next, we will, so again, on here, we're showing the different symbols inside that filter editor that are valid. So again, the % is going to be your wildcard. Underscore is for a single character. % is for multiple characters. You can use brackets to indicate multiple values. You could even exclude multiple values using the caret. So these are more SQL syntax operators rather than some of the other operators that we're used to, like star and maybe a question mark for a single character. All right, go on to the next section. So saved views. So some of these operations that we've seen can be stored and saved for future use, and they are called a saved view. And one thing to note here is that a folder remembers what view it should be displaying. So we'll see a couple instances coming up of what that really means. And when we're making these changes, like adding columns or stuff like that, you know, are we changing just the current folder, or are we actually going to be affecting a view? I'm going to close here. So first off, our views are stored up over in the left-hand corner of our toolbar. And right now, everything is usually set to that default view. So when we make a change to our customized view, and we're including fields or excluding fields, turning them on and off, right? All of that stuff is being stored inside the default view. If we wanted to create yet another one, you can come in and say, define a custom view. So right now we have two default out-of-the-box ones. We got default and we have paged. I'm going to go ahead and copy the default view. Let's call it my view. And once we have that view, we have access to all of the fields and whatnot to turn on and off. So we can come in and say, modify that. Again, this should be familiar here, the fields. So maybe I don't want to see state and revision, but I want to see, you know, things like maybe material. Right. So we'll go ahead and move that up. Say OK here. Close there. And close here. So now we've got a new option on this drop-down for my view. So it goes in and changes out, took out the column headers that I had previously and put in the new ones here. So you can see that now I'm displaying material instead of state and revision. So again, like we said, a view, a folder remembers which view it was last used in. So if we come back to the parent folder, suspension fork, it goes back to the default view, which it was last saved as. So if we come back to components, again, it goes back to my view because that was the last view that was active when we were in that folder. Again, a folder is going to remember which of these it was last used on. A couple things to note here is when you, if you do have a custom view going, like here we have my view, if you come in and say, we have this apply settings to, so this is a little misleading here. So the apply settings to the default view, that actually means what is the current view active. So if we were to make a change, as in adding another column, it would change the definition of my view. If we were set to current view, it's only going to be applicable to this particular folder. So we'll see what that looks like in action here. So if I say my default view, my apply settings are default view, and let's just go in and customize this view, and we'll add in the author. Move it up. Right. So now we have author. So if we come over to suspension fork, let me change that to my view. It's going to have author and material, right? Because we made that change to say that it affected the definition of the view, the default view. So we'll come back in here, and if I say only make this applicable to the current view, let's say I take out author here, and now I move back to suspension fork, which still had my view, but it retains author, right? So this is the default definition of my view, and we have an overridden view of my view here in this folder because we took out my view. We can come back, again, that's what the difference is between the apply settings to the default view or the current view. Again, default view doesn't mean the named default view, it just means whatever is currently active, what view is currently active, the changes will be made to. All right. couple other things with views. So again, multiple things can be done in there, not just displaying columns or taking away columns, but you can even pre-filter, and custom filters here in this sense is just, it's using the search mechanism. So maybe if you only wanted to see part files or, whatever the case might be, you can have a pre-filter kind of set on that already. So maybe if you only wanted to see files that were for review, you could come in and say, what's the state contains review? Add that and say, okay, close, close. So coming into this folder here, right, anytime we have that My View, we're only seeing pre-filtered. You'll notice up over in the right-hand corner here, there's a little yellow icon that says that there is a custom filter applied. So if you come to a folder and you're not seeing what you expect to, maybe someone has a custom filter already applied. So you'll just want to see if that little filter icon is shown there. So we come back to the default view here, that little filter icon goes away. All right, so that's about it for saved views. So next we'll talk about some of the administration controls that utilize properties. They're used in a few different places. First off, category rules are one source that properties are being used in. We can also control the visibility of properties based on their category. So we'll talk about some of the reasons to do that. And then it's also used in transition criteria. So we can put certain tests on properties to make sure certain things are filled out or whatever the case might be, and use those to help make sure that they're filled out before something gets released, let's say. We want to make sure that the material is filled out or the description's filled out, so we don't want a file to be released without that stuff, so we can kind of test the files and test those properties during the transition. So we'll go ahead and first talk about some of the category rules. So an assignment rule is basically when we check a file in, Vault looks to all of its rules and tests the property values inside of the file to see if it meets any of the criteria to automatically assign it to a category. So the example here we have is engineering. So if a file gets checked in and the file name ends with IPT, IAM, yada, 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 it gets automatically assigned to the engineering category. So that helps save the user from having to categorize the files manually themselves after they check a file in. If you are working in 2019 or later, the rule criteria actually accepts the OR operators. So in 2018 and prior, we would have to have a rule for each file type. It was kind of a pain, but now we can test with ORs inside of this criteria. Other properties that we might use for automatic categorization might be different departments. And one way I've recommended companies utilize templates. So if you have different templates for your different departments, you can put a property in there that identifies, hey, this file is hydraulic, this file is mechanical, right? So if you put those properties in there ahead of time in your templates, that saves the user from having to, again, try to go and categorize these files manually, because we're able to pick up on those properties and get those categorized the right way, again, so that they get the right life cycle, get the right revision scheme, all the different reasons why we use categories in the first place. And also, we'll talk a little bit here about categorization for content center files. One reason why content center files might want to be categorized separately is that a lot of them are static. They're they're read-only, they're you know, quarter 20 bolts, right? There's not much to them. And so some customers will create a life cycle and a category that automatically will release them, right? Because we're not checking them. Quarter 20 bolt is a quarter 20 bolt is a quarter 20 bolt. So by being able to identify a content center file and automatically releasing it, again, we're saving steps from having the users to go through the steps of releasing them. And there's actually a hidden property in Content Center files that we can key off of to help identify them for use in a category rule. I'll go ahead and kind of expose that here a little bit. So I'll come into my vault settings, and we'll come over to behaviors and properties. And what I did is created a new vault property. Sort that. I'm calling it is content center part, is CC part. If we look at the mapping, the file property it's looking at is called is content. And the only place that that's actually present is on a content center file. It's not something that's visible in the I properties. It's something that's buried in a content center file. But Vault can pick up on it. Vault can key on it. And so if a content center file is checked in, it'll have this property. And if it has that property, you can then have a rule that tests if that is CC part, if that's true, then go ahead and categorize that as standard. And again, why we do that is that the standard category might have a life cycle definition that automatically releases it. It's the default state is released. You don't have to go through a release process for standard content center files. There are some other content center files that you may not want to have automatically released, but still have that property, and that's so things like frame members or tube and pipe members, where they come from Content Center, but they have variable lengths, which make them unique. So we wouldn't want them necessarily to be automatically released. We would want them to go through some kind of process where they're reviewed or checked. So there's a couple other properties we can sniff out to help identify if it's not only just a Content Center file, but is it a frame member? Is it a tube and pipe member? So what I do here is created a property called length. And if we look at the mapping on length, there's a few parameters that are exported as I properties, GL, OPL, and PL. So each of these are in frame members or tube and pipe members. So if they're present and they have values, Vault will pull that value out and put it in this length property. And so if we come back to our rules, that's why we have this standard custom here. So not only are we testing if it's a Content Center part, but does it also have a length value? Right, so again, pulling the length of a channel or an angle. So if either of those or if both of those are true, right, then it'll get assigned to that custom standard category, which gives it, again, the whole reason to have categories is you're assigning the default life cycles. So this might have a normal engineering life cycle assigned to it. So again, that's a little bit on why we use properties for category rules, because we can help key off of them and do a little more smartly assigning of the categories to them. And next we have so again, in our property panels, the values that are displayed are based on the categories that are assigned. So you can have one set of properties shown for an engineering type of file, or if we come over to here, so here this ANSI, this angle iron file, it's a standard custom. It has a different set of properties displayed for us over in the UDPs. So this has the ISCC part as well as the length, right? Whereas if we were to look at, an engineering type category file, right, it does not have ISCC part, it doesn't have length. So you can control what values you're displaying to your users based on the categories that they're in. And again, why that might be important is that having your properties exposed in the panel here gives you a little bit faster access if you're going to modify them. So you can just come in and click on the value, and up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can have edit properties, or the easier one is edit selected properties. Right, so that's going to take that particular property and populate it in here, so that the user doesn't have to come in and say, oh, well, I'm going to go and edit this property, that property, and the other one. Right, by having it selectable in the visible properties in the UDPs over on the right-hand side, they can access them and make changes to multiple properties, and kind of that nice little setup. Again, saving clicks, saving a little bit of time from having to go and try to find the properties. And next, we'll talk about some of the transition criteria. So inside of a life cycle, inside of behaviors, life cycles, flexible release process. So let's look at the transitions. So if we were to go from work in progress to released, one of the things here is that one of the criteria is that a property called property compliance is compliant. That sounds kind of weird, but basically what this is checking for is that there's no compliancy issues with the properties. So I'll circle back to that here, but you can also put in things like add in something like maybe description is not empty. So that has to be true in order for this to progress from work in progress to released. So it's a way to kind of do a little bit of quality checking on your files beforehand, before they get released, so you don't have to go through a quick change or a revision just to update some property values. So you can kind of check your metadata to make sure that they filled out what they needed to fill out before they get released. Right? But circling back to the property compliance thing, if we come back to property definitions, let's come back to, let's say, that length property. So if we look at the settings for a given property, you have these settings here. These determine a property's compliance. So is it a drop-down value? Is it case sensitive? Is there a certain length that it cannot exceed? Right, so if we said description cannot be more than 40 characters, and we wrote in a sentence for description, well, Vault's going to flag that file as being non-compliant. And if that's the case, then we wouldn't be able to release it because that property check is preventing that. So most of the time, these aren't in use. Another reason why a file might not be compliant is if the properties are mismatching. So Vault has the property saying one value, the file says a different value and there's a mismatch there, and Vault's going to flag that as non-compliant as well. So again, that check that we saw, property compliance is compliant, it's looking for two things, right? Make sure that all of your properties are adhering to these specifications, case sensitivity, maximum length, and then making sure that the values match between your property, or between the values in the vault and in the file. All right. So next we'll talk about some of the derived outputs that properties are going to be good for. So we have the print preview and grid exports, which are a nice way to get quick little files with property and file information. We have full-on reports and data mapping. So that's going to be a Vault Pro only thing where we can run these reports. And there's a couple miscellaneous spots where just didn't kind of fit in any of the other above categories. So real quick on derived outputs. So the print preview is based on a grid, so you can run it either in the main grid or on, again, the uses, where used, or history. Any of those can be used as a print preview. But again, it just kind of gives you the same look or the same information that's currently in that grid. It's going to set it up for three different things. Either you can print it out, like print preview sounds like. You can also email that as a file, so like a HTML, an Excel, PDF, or you can just download the file as one of those file types as well, right? So that's the print preview. Grid export is basically the same thing, but it's only going to send it out to an Excel file, and it's a little quicker to do because there's less steps involved with it. We'll do a real quick demo on that. So if we come in and look at a folder, let's say this components here, so you can see again my filter here is active because I have that My View here. We'll come back to the default view. And print previews are going to come from your file menu. You got to click into the grid that you want a print preview of. Down here, print preview. So again, it just gives us the same view of what is currently in that grid. And the different options here are to go ahead and export the document. So I could download this as a PDF or any of these other file types, Excel file. I could also send it with my default mail client as an attachment. So like maybe I wanted to send my boss a print of all the currently released files in that folder. Right? So you could just do a quick print preview, email, PDF as an attachment, and go. You can also add in your own headers and footers. Again, if this was more of a, if you had more pages in here, you could come in and add, things like page number or the date that it was printed, give it a title. So those things will show up here, and those settings are going to stick. They're sticky. So the next time I run this print preview, I'll have the same header and footer set up as what I had just done here. So maybe go ahead and send that as a PDF. A few options here. So that asks us, do we want to open it up? Again, it's a nice quick way to get a print of, or a file of all the different files that are in that folder. Then we also have the grid export. So again, from the file menu, we have export. And all it does is asks for file name. We'll send it off to the desktop. And it's not as nice as the print preview because it doesn't ask us, do we want to open the file up? It just dumped it to the desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and close. Oops, where did it go? Let's try that one more time. I'm not sure why I didn't see it on the desktop, but I'll go ahead and open that file up anyways. So here we've got the Excel file of, again, just showing the headers that were active in that view. It comes pre-filtered, so you could say, I want to only see certain files. So those are the couple quick little exports of derived outputs. All right, so next is using the reporting mechanisms with Vault Pro. So you can get a folder dashboard. So if you're using your folders as kind of like a project, quote unquote, you'd be able to select on a folder and get a report showing all the different states of the files that are in that folder. We can do visual data management and actually do what we call data mapping, which kind of is a way to paint your properties onto the model, and also being able to use data cards. And then we can also utilize more properties inside of the Vault browser. Go ahead and show a couple of those items there. So when you come into a folder and select on one of its subfolders, I'm going to select on, go to assemblies, and we'll take a look at that suspension fork. So here we've got the report section. You can come in and configure it and say, what template do you want to use? And Vault comes with a few out of the box. And I'll come down and say, take a look at file by state, lifecycle state. A few options here. Do you want to look in any subfolders? Include dependents. So if you have dependent files that are in other folder locations, you want to make sure that you pick up on those. So take those couple there. So it goes in and generates the report based on that criteria. And we can kind of scroll down here and we can kind of get a nice little visual cue of what states everything's in, how many files are in there. Got over here on the left-hand side the different states. So if you wanted to see just what's for review, right, you'd be able to come in and click on that, maybe just seeing the obsolete stuff. Again, this is all just part of the same report. We're just clicking on different sections here. And again, any property can be included with these reports, right? So there's a way to edit the default templates that reports come from to either include or exclude different property values. So if you have any of your custom iProperties from Vault, SAP numbers or something like that, you can include them into these reports here. So next we'll talk about the visual data map inventor. So here we are in the Vault tab, and there's this button here called data mapping. And what we'll do is kind of the same way we selected the template from inside of Vault. You can come into here. So if you say open a local template, it's going to go to that same folder location that we just navigated to from inside of Vault. One weird thing though is that when you're working inside of Inventor, sometimes it wouldn't work if you're using this folder in the program files, because for some reason Inventor wants to write a change back to the file, and it'll say, oh, the file's read-only, we can't do that. So what I do for this particular one is I've saved it to a location in my documents. So the one that I was looking for is called Vault Professional in CAD. I found it in its default location, copied it into a folder that's writable, right, outside of program files. So here it's in my docs, and then once you've loaded it in, you can say go ahead and generate the report. It's going to take a second. It's going to kind of run through its paces. And then what we'll see is we have a few different ways to display the information, based on properties. So this little black triangle over here gets us to view different properties, like maybe material, right? So you can break down your assembly by the types of materials that are in there. The nice thing here is, I'm going to go ahead and change this color, make it a little bit different, a little more visually different. And you can actually apply the color mapping. So this is going to, like I said before, paint the property colors onto the assembly itself. So anything that is green is going to be mild steel. Right? Anything that's brown is going to be an ABS plastic. And then the purple is an aluminum. So again, it's just a way to visually represent your property values in CAD. Another interesting one here is we could do state. So we've got for review, released, some work in progress stuff here. And again, we can go in and paint that on. So all of our green stuff is work in progress. Red is already released. And you could say, so maybe I'm a checker at this point, and I say, my job here is to check the values, check the model. So I can come in and double click on that piece of the pie. I can say isolate that. So then it kind of makes transparent all the other files, so that, I can only see, right now I'm only looking at the files that are for review. Again, as a checker, that might be what's important to me. And, through that process, that's fine. We're going to go ahead and say that that stuff is okay. You can right-click on that and say, apply that as a selection set. See over in the model browser, it highlights everything. This is where we can come in and utilize our data cards. Data cards are just a way to modify properties inside of CAD. So I'm going to go ahead and get the CAD selection. And so now everything that I have selected are just the files that were for review. Right? And maybe I want to come in and enter my initials because I just checked them. I'm going to hit the edit button. It's going to ask me to update my properties. It's going to check out those files. I can make a change here. Right? All of them have that little asterisk showing that they need to be saved. Apply that. Save them all. And then at that point, you could save each of those and do a life cycle change, right? You can change the state and release each one of those. So again, everything that we just did was property related, painting properties onto our models, being able to get selection sets based on the property values rather than just trying to pick and select from the model browser. So I think I'm over a little bit here. The last couple things to talk about would be the two other places. Properties can be used in Watermarks. So when you're running the batch plot utility, you can actually apply a property-based watermark. So by default, you'd probably want to use something like the state so that it paints, work in progress or released or whatever the case might be, or maybe it's for construction. right? Whatever the case might be, you can utilize properties as watermarks in batch plot, and also as a watermark on the visualization on the DWFs inside of the item master. So again, probably wanting to use something like the state, but any property could be displayed as a watermark for items or batch plotted files. All right, so that's about all I had. We'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Jesse.